It's time for some shakeup. We're entering a key stretch of the fantasy season, so we've got to go through rest of season top 30 wide receiver rankings. I'll be giving away 5 free FFN hats when I hit 18,000 subscribers, and the way to qualify to get one is to go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into tier 1 right here. Nico Collins, yes, I've got him at number 1. Obviously, he did not play on Sunday night versus the Detroit Lions. That is going to be imperative if we can get him back as soon as possible. Probably looks like it's trending toward that direction to where we will see him the next time that they inevitably play. With Nico Collins here, if you just look at it from a per game perspective here, this is our wide receiver 1 right here. 18 fantasy points per game in a half PPR format. He has been absolutely dominant in fantasy football when he has played. The only concern I have with Nico Collins here is does CJ Stroud start to look better? I think he does. He's still a good quarterback. He's definitely struggled without Nico Collins here, and I think it's completely tied to no Nico Collins. Whenever Nico's back, he's going to continue to get 8 targets per game and have that major big play upside. With Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, they're in tier 1 for a reason. If you want to rank them over Nico, knock yourself out. I've got a clear Nico number 1. With Jamar and Justin Jefferson, you know, the reality with Jamar is that you take away those 2 Ravens games, and obviously you can't just take them away, but my point in saying this is if you take those 2 Ravens games away, they're significantly skewing his numbers. He's averaging 19.2 fantasy points per game on a half PPR number, but if you take out those Ravens games, he's had one other game with over 20 fantasy points in a half PPR format. Week 3 versus Washington. This has not been a guy who is consistently giving you these massive games. In the middle of that, there's a lot of 15-point games. There's a lot of 9-point games. Again, splitting hairs here between 1 and 2, but that's why I've got Jamar Chase at number 2 and JJ at number 3. Obviously, with Justin Jefferson, the only question really is going to be how many more down games does he have like he just had on Sunday versus the Jags? Because Darnold is not, like, he's showing cracks. He just played an awful, horrific, abysmally disgraceful game against the Jaguars. And Justin Jefferson didn't have his best game at all. But obviously still the number 1 wide receiver there. Belongs in the wide receiver 1 tier without question. Dropping down to our next tier, A.J. Brown at number 4, Drake London at number 5, and Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 6. With all these guys right here, you're going to see, specifically with A.J. Brown, the number 1 reason he's the number 1 guy in this tier is because he's got the biggest upside for the big play games. Obviously, he's going to get you over 100 yards per game, basically. That's really kind of a given at this point with A.J. Brown. The big play upside is still there. Obviously, still dealing with some injuries here, so maybe that does cap the upside in some weeks and not as many games where he gets you 20, 25-point games, but the potential to do that is still there. With London and Amon-Ra St. Brown, London's the better option for sure, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is starting to hit that again. Amon-Ra St. Brown, even in that Sunday night game, didn't look like he was going to come out with much. But this Lions team is so good offensively that even if you keep them down for 2 quarters, he's going to still find his way to produce for you. With London here, the good thing with him is that he's got Kirk Cousins, who's going to consistently give Drake London plenty of opportunities to hit big weeks. And even when he doesn't hit big weeks, Drake London is a very consistent receiver in fantasy football. You know, his first week versus Pittsburgh, that was his worst game by far in fantasy football. And the only other game where he's had less than 6 targets, besides that week 1 game, was the week 9 game versus Dallas, but he also left that game early. So London and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're going to continue to be great options here. Dropping down to our next tier, Terry McLaurin at 7 and Garrett Wilson at 8. With Terry McLaurin here, you just got to look at this guy and just understand. Terry McLaurin has done this all year. He's getting 5 catches, 100 yards. Depending on if he gets in the end zone or not, he's going to give you a big week or he's going to give you a really, really solid floor. Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 5 right now in fantasy football as of this moment in time. And it's just because consistently, when you look at this game log right here, you take out those first 2 games, he's consistently getting you double-digit fantasy points. And it's honestly kind of interesting to look at here because he's not even averaging, like, he's only had 10 targets in 1 game. Week 4 versus Arizona. Every other week, it's like 8, 7, 6 targets. And he's still just really efficient. Him and Jaden just have a connection that they have built and spent time building, and it's here to stay. With Garrett Wilson here, he's the better option. He's been the better option than Terry McLaurin because he's hit more spike weeks than Terry McLaurin has. And listen, he's got more spike weeks in him. He's got some good matchups upcoming here. But the reality is his floor is lower than Terry's. What we just saw versus the Cardinals, That's not going to be the last time we're going to see that. So that's the only caution that I bring with Garrett Wilson, is he will have games in the 6-7 point realm, whereas with Terry, I don't see that. Now with Garrett, he's got the upside that I don't think Terry possesses. I don't think he has 26, 27 point games in him like Garrett Wilson does, that Terry being, but I think that Garrett Wilson, just with the lower floor, is going to go down one spot below Terry in these rankings. And then I've got my two Rams receivers, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. Honestly, still can't make up my mind on these two. Considered putting Puka over Kupp, and I eventually just stuck with Cooper Kupp here just because of the simple reality. With Cooper Kupp, I think his target and his red zone usage is going to be more consistent than Puka Nacua's is. With Puka, we just haven't seen but one game this year fully healthy and in control. I mean, this is just the reality, is that Puka, we don't have enough of a sample size yet to say that he's going to consistently be better than Cooper Kupp. That's why I've got him over, but it could very easily flip. Both these guys play with Stafford. He's playing really good football right now, and both these guys, as long as they're both healthy, are going to be 10 to 7 targets per game types of guys with the big play upside attached to them. They're both great options. Dropping down to our next tier right here, Jayden Reed at 11 and Mike Evans at 12. With Jayden Reed here, obviously the past month has not been very good. He's had a mixture between like 14 to 15 point games and a mixture between like 4 to 3 point games. The floor is low. There's no question. I say it every time I talk about dude. He is Deebo Samuel Jr., but I actually prefer Jayden over Deebo. They're coming off the bye week this week. Hopefully, Jayden Reed got that lingering ankle issue a little bit right, and hopefully Jordan Love is going to come in much healthier as well. But Jayden Reed reality strikes when he hits you a 30-point game. That's his upside that he possesses here, so he's realistically not going outside the top 12 for me when he's got that potential. And then with Mike Evans here, obviously we're going to need to see when he comes back. Reports up to this point have been pretty solid that they may get him back after their Week 11 bye week. So Week 12 is when we're looking at to get Mike Evans back. And if that's the case, he needs to be a top 12 guy, because Baker's still playing really good football right now, and Mike Evans without Godwin is going to consistently get you not only the touchdown upside that he always brings, but he's going to consistently bring more targets to the table as well. With Zay Flowers at 13 and DK Metcalf at 14, I just look at these two guys very similarly to where they're both boom or bust plays. And when they boom, you obviously are like, why are they ranked higher always? Well, it's because when you look at their bust weeks, they're pretty similar to each other. Like Zay Flowers, his floor in fantasy football is what we saw versus the Cincinnati Bengals. That was a high-flying matchup. He should have had a great week, but he didn't, because that's the potential that we have with Zay Flowers on a week-to-week basis. Especially with Deontay in the building now. He obviously wasn't involved in that Cincinnati game, but he will be involved when they play the Pittsburgh Steelers here in just a couple days. So I do think that with Zay, great upside player. Same with DK Metcalf, but looking at DK Metcalf here as well, again, the boom-bust potential with DK Metcalf is not to be ignored. He can get you a 20-point week. He can also get you a 5-point week as well. That's what DK can do. When you've got a quarterback like Geno Smith, that's in your cards right there. There's no question about it. So DK and Zay, they're both very, very similar to me. High upside plays, but obviously with DK, the reason I've got Zay ahead of him is because we, again, need to know when he comes back. Hopefully he comes back off the bye. I've seen reports that are kind of like iffy on that. Obviously, we're going to need to see when he comes back. When he comes back off the bye, he's here at 14. Dropping down to our next tier right here. Deebo Samuel at 15 and Tyreek Hill at 16. With Deebo Samuel, I was looking through it today, and obviously he didn't perform too bad in Week 10. Like, he's still getting the opportunities on a per-game basis here. But what's really important to notice here is that he's only had really one boom game. He had the boom game versus Seattle where he ended up getting in the end zone, but that's been it, basically. He's had 2 touchdowns this year, 1 through the air and 1 on the ground. The big play upside just has not been there with Deebo Samuel. So realistically, that's kind of what his game is built off of, big play upside. So if there's a year like this year where he's not hitting it, you can't have him inside the top 12. I still look at him as a solid wide receiver too, because he does have the potential to do it, but it hasn't been there this year, probably because he hasn't been healthy. And with Tyreek Hill, obviously we're dealing with an unhealthy player here too. He may or may not play tonight as I'm filming this before the Los Angeles Rams and the Miami Dolphins take on each other. So we're going to have to monitor if he even plays. Tyreek Hill without Tua, no secret has been made that he has been underwhelming. Now, it's important to note that when you look at the game log on the screen, he has not been bad with Tua. He just hasn't given you Tyreek games. So realistically, at this point, I cannot put him inside the top 15 with what we've been given with him with Tua to this point. DeAndre Hopkins at 17 and George Pickens at 18. With DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to have better weeks than what he just gave you. That was against Pat Surtain. That's a brutal matchup for any and every single wide receiver in fantasy football. Don't look at that as an indictment. Look more to the Bucks game, where he had 2 touchdowns in that game, and he was destroying the defense. That will happen a lot of times. The Chiefs are a great offense. He's obviously serving the Rashee Rice role. The only reason he's down here at 17 is because he's more matchup dependent these days. He doesn't have the speed, obviously. He never really did, but especially now he doesn't have the speed. And there will be weeks where he's taken out of the game script because if you put him on a really talented corner or just a good defensive coordinator gets a hold of this matchup, they'll be able to neutralize him just a little bit more than they would have been able to a couple years back. George Pickens. You know, the way I look at this, to be honest with you guys, Russell Wilson with 3 straight games, 3 touchdowns. Like, George Pickens is finding the end zone. I don't think this is a fluke. Actually, the way I look at this, he's starting to become Terry McLaurin. He's giving you a lot of 4 catches, 80 yards, a touchdown. 5 catches, 100 yards, a touchdown. That's what we're starting to see here. Not a target hog. A guy that's getting you decent amount of targets, but nothing to an incredible amount. But George Pickens is hitting the big plays, and he's just getting enough volume to make him a very, very solid wide receiver 2. He's a wide receiver 2 that is really ascending, and at some point during the next few weeks, honestly could become a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy. T. Higgins around out the tier. Obviously, we need to know when he comes back. But when this dude comes back, he's been excellent. Do not forget, T. Higgins has been great this year. Obviously, it stinks with the injuries and everything like that. And I read a quote from head coach Zach Taylor that didn't really exactly give the most positive outlook when it comes to T. Higgins moving forward. He said, we're still kind of taking it slow with T. So obviously, this one doesn't look like he may be for sure coming back in week 11. When he comes back, I want in. The only reason he's lower right now is because we have no idea where T. Higgins is going to be playing again. When he plays again, T. Higgins is definitely a top 12 play on a weekly basis, though. Another top-notch play is when you hit the higher on Matt Stafford's projection tonight on Underdog. This is the perfect chance to go ahead and get in on Underdog because it is a free customer pick that will basically win you free money. So just go down there in the comments, grab the link that's there, use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. And when you hit the higher on this sweat-free pick with Matt Stafford tonight, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Dropping out to our next tier right here. CeeDee Lamb at 20 and Cedric Tillman at 21. With CeeDee Lamb here, I said it before the week. I said it heading into week 10. His upside is going to explicitly come from what his target share is going to be like. If he's getting targets, he's going to have upside. But if he's not getting enough targets, this upside is not going to hold. He had 4 catches for less than 20 yards. That's what the problem is with Cooper Rush now. Whether it's Cooper Rush or Trey Lance, I don't care. Without Dak Prescott, he is not a top 15 guy anymore. It's unfortunate, but he needs 15 targets a game to give you real significant fantasy upside. Other than that, he's going to give you around 10 fantasy points per game. Cedric Tillman. You may think I'm crazy for doing this. Some of you may agree. Cedric Tillman, look at 3 games with Jameis Winston. This guy is averaging 10 targets per game, basically. 3 games with Jameis Winston. He's the number 1 target without question, a big play threat, and he's looking like he looks like the best wide receiver in Cleveland. It's not Jerry Jeudy, it's not Elijah Moore. Cedric Tillman, through 3 games with Jameis Winston, has been the best player for this team. Cedric Tillman is the real deal. Coming out of the bye week, it's easy to forget about him. Waiver wire player, not a popular player. I'm telling you guys. Some of you may think I'm crazy, but some of you may agree with this one. Cedric Tillman here at 21, very firmly planted. 22 and 23, Darnell Mooney and Marvin Harrison Jr. You know what, Darnell Mooney, I just got done saying with Drake London. The good thing that you can expect with Falcons wide receivers is very consistent weekly upside. Because Kirk Cousins throwing the ball is always going to throw for 300 yards a game, and he's going to give these wide receivers a lot of fantasy upside. Obviously, Darnold's still number 2 in this Atlanta offense. I don't consider him in the same tier as a T. Higgins, but I do think he's the second best wide receiver 2 on a respected team in fantasy right now. I'd pick him over Devonta Smith. I'd pick him over somebody like a Jalen Waddle. I think he's the best wide receiver 2 on a particular NFL team because of the upside that he's just shown that he has with Kirk Cousins at the quarterback position. He had a decent game on Sunday versus the New Orleans Saints. That wasn't even his ceiling, though. His floor is honestly just pretty high, and that's why I like him over Marvin, who definitely has the ceiling of Darnell Mooney, but that's the problem. His ceiling really isn't that much higher. It's actually not higher than Darnell Mooney. It's just about the same. But the reality is his floor is a lot lower because Kyler doesn't always hit him. He's not always open, and he doesn't get that many targets per game. So with Marvin, it's either he gets in the end zone or he's really efficient on all his work, or he's not going to give you much because his ceiling is really high, but his floor is really low because he's just not receiving the volume to the level that I thought we were going to get at some point this year. It's been a disappointment for sure. Devonta Smith and Josh Downs round out this tier. Devonta Smith, as I just got done saying, I prefer Darnell Mooney as a wide receiver 2 over Devonta Smith. I think Devonta Smith is, this is a good example of what happened on Sunday, what can happen with Devonta Smith sometimes. Sometimes he's faded out of this game plan, and A.J. Brown has one of his big games. Other times, it's like it was on Sunday where they beat the crap out of the Cowboys, and they don't need to throw. So don't look at that game as an indictment against him. Yeah, it was a bad game, but realistically, he's been a very good player. Like, this is something that's going to be very reliable to keep up with in fantasy. So I just don't really look at this and say to myself, I'm concerned. Because he's going to have upside weeks. He's going to have down weeks like this. And that's why he's neutralized here at number 24. And with Josh Downs at 25 here, this is completely dependent on if Joe Flacco sticks around. I have no idea. Honestly, after seeing Joe Flacco toss 6 interceptions through the last 2 games, they may very well go back to Anthony Richardson. I don't know. But I'll tell you this, if Downs has to deal with Richardson, it's not going to be good. He's going to go down to, flexible territory. Right now, I still consider him a pretty reliable start on a weekly basis because of target share. He's getting targets and he's getting opportunities on a weekly basis with Flacco. He's clearly his wide receiver 1. Pittman's dealing with injury, and he's been the most effective guy. But definitely going to be a problem. Going to be a one to watch this week, whether Richardson takes over here or whether it's still going to be Flacco. Dropping down to our last tier. Jackson Smith-Njigba at 26, Devontae Adams at 27. With Jackson Smith-Njigba, obviously it's going to be overhyped because he had a massive game in week 9. He had an enormous game, and it's important to remember a couple things. Number 1, DK Metcalf was not there. And number 2, Jackson Smith-Njigba, the reality with the Seattle wide receivers is that when you've got Geno Smith at quarterback, anything goes. There's going to be games where Jackson Smith-Njigba gets 12 targets but only gets like 4 catches for 30 yards. We've seen that this year because he's not that accurate and he's not consistent. So with Jackson Smith-Njigba, I love the upside, but with DK coming back, his upside is not going to be that high. He's not going to have another 30-plus point game unless DK misses the rest of the season. That's just not going to happen here. So with Jackson Smith-Njigba, you've got to take into account with DK coming back, his upside is lower. And then Devontae Adams here, look, it's been proven that Garrett Wilson's the better option. There's no question. He's the better option in New York. Devontae still has PPR upside because he's getting targeted and he's getting these high percentage throws that Rodgers likes to throw close to the line of scrimmage, but he's not a big play threat. That's Garrett Wilson. He's the big play threat in this offense now. He's going down the field. He's obviously got a lot of athleticism that Adams just doesn't have at this point of his career. So clear favorite is Garrett Wilson in this offense, but Devontae Adams still a solid wide receiver 3. Jacoby Myers at 28. Jacoby Myers, I don't think gets the credit he deserves. This guy is dealing with horrible quarterback play, and he's still able to give you 16, 17-point games. Now, obviously, his floor is lower because this quarterback situation is bad. And there will be weeks where he gives you 7 points, 6 points. But there's also weeks where he's going to get you 17 fantasy points because he's the lone bright spot in that offense outside of Brock Bowers, and he's just a good receiver. That's what he deserves credit for. He's a good receiver in the NFL, and he's a good wide receiver in fantasy football. Juwan Jennings at 29 and Romeo Doubs at 30 to round this out. Juwan Jennings here, listen, Juwan Jennings is a good play from now on. I think Ricky Pearsall is also a good play. I still prefer Juwan Jennings. He's been the more consistent target throughout the entire season that Ricky Pearsall has been. And with Juwan Jennings, there's obviously upside in San Francisco when you factor in that Debo is not a traditional wide receiver 1. He's not always out wide. He's not always running routes. This is a non-traditional wide receiver 1. Obviously still going to dominate most weeks in touches, but Juwan Jennings is the true wide receiver in this room outside of Ricky Pearsall. I think Jawan Jennings has another several good games lined up for him this year, putting him at 29 and Romeo Doubs at 30. Easy to forget, coming off a bye week, and sometimes Romeo Doubs is bad. It's kind of like Jacoby Myers in a way, where it's like, there will be weeks where he gives you like 4 fantasy points, but it's not because he's not important to this offense. He actually is becoming a really important option. Jaden's the best upside play, but Romeo is actually running a lot of routes on a per-game basis here. And he's been averaging a lot of targets per game over the last month. So with Romeo Doubs here, not my favorite in Green Bay, it's clearly Jaden Reed, but I do like Romeo Doubs at number 30 here. So let me know how your team looks so far, and make sure to stay tuned for later in the day. We've got another very important video about the defense position moving forward.